In John chapter 13, Jesus is with his disciples the night before he would be crucified, and he's giving kind of his last words of advice to them, and this is what he says. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So he says, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. What does it mean? What does it look like how Jesus loved one another? Well, that night, the night before his crucifixion, he was gathered together with his disciples. And what did he do? They saw him do something strange. He got up from the meal. Jesus took off his outer coat, and he grabbed a water basin. And then he went down by his disciples. And he picked up in their hand the sour-smelling, bacteria-filled feet of his disciples. He picked up those feet in his hands, and he started to wash them. Really a job in those days that only a servant would do. And not only did he washed Matthew's feet, and then Andrew's feet, and then he went down and he went over to Peter. And Jesus told Peter, tonight you're going to deny that you even know me. In fact, you're going to call curses down on yourself that you don't know me. And that was going to happen. And yet, he didn't skip over Peter. He washed Peter's feet. And then he went down the line and he got to Judas. And Judas probably had those 30 pieces of silver clanging in his pocket because he had already betrayed Jesus. And that night he was going to hand Jesus over. And Jesus didn't skip over him. Jesus washed his feet. So what is Jesus showing the disciples? He says, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Make yourself second, Jesus says. Put others first. Be willing to be a servant. Be willing to give up everything. Be willing to sacrifice. And that's radically different than what I think Christianity usually is about. Usually, for me, Christianity is about showing up and getting fed. Getting a sermon, getting some teaching, getting something. What's in it for me, Christianity? And Jesus says that's not what Christianity is about. It's not what's in it for me. It's how does this message move me to serve? And then look what happens. Everyone, if you love one another as I've loved you, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. People outside will look at you and realize you're a follower of Jesus. Now, maybe some of you are wondering, I thought we preach grace here. I thought we're saved not by what we do, but we're saved by what we believe. And this sounds a lot like work-righteous performance Christianity. All about loving one another, washing people's disgusting feet, and doing things for other people. That sounds different than our Lutheran theology of saved by grace, not by performance. Well, that's not what Jesus is talking about. I think Jesus knows what it means to be saved by grace, right? I don't think Jesus is contradicting his own message. But the way we treat people is kind of like the warning lights that pop on your dashboard in your car. I don't know much about cars, but I know this much. When I was driving my 1998 Buick LeSabre and driving this boat down the road, and all of a sudden the red light popped on the front of my dashboard that said overheating, I knew the one thing I had to do was stop. That light was not the problem. It wasn't about the light, it was about what that light was telling me. That light was telling me, I got to pull over or my engine's going to explode, or I got to turn this car off. And, very similar, I think this happened the same week. When I was driving down Colonia, which is one of the busiest streets, I was driving down that road, and I put my foot on the brake, and the foot went all the way down to the floor. And the car had been up in Wisconsin in the cold and outside over the whole winter, and the whole bottom was rusty. And so when I put the brake down and the brake went all the way to the floor, I didn't know exactly what that meant at first, but later I found out I need to slow down. I need to get off the road because my brake lines had rusted out, right? There was nothing there. That's what good works are. Good works are those messages, that signs that something internally is not right. And that's why it was so hard for me to study this text. You see, I know all the right doctrine. Weren't you impressed by, I knew Greek. I said a Greek word during this. Weren't you impressed by that? And I've studied all the right stuff, and I know all the right Bible passages, and I can memorize them and tell you them, and I have so much Bible information popping around my head. But here's the question. If you followed me around for the week, would you know that I was a follower of Jesus? And I don't know. I know the answer to that. Because I don't know if my life always produces the good fruit that Jesus is talking about. And when I have to honestly look at my life and see what's going on internally, those red lights are going off, that there's something not right. And I don't think I'm the only one. Now, it's hard for us to realize this, that there's something not right. So let's try to do it this way. Let's say this afternoon, well, maybe pick another day when it's not so snowy, but you went to work, you went into your neighborhood, and you had a clipboard with a survey. And you went around to all the people you know, all your neighborhood friends, all of your coworkers, and you said, what is your impression of churches in the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod? And you just went around and you took a survey of everybody you knew. What would be the responses you would get? Would you hear back, oh, that's the church that loves Jesus? That church is so full of people who are on fire for Jesus. Those churches are the ones that love one another. In fact, if I have a problem, they're going to welcome me in. And that's the people I want to go to. Is that what we would get if we would do a survey? Probably not. The survey would probably say something like, well, I've heard that they're judgmental, or I've heard that they're kind of closed off. I heard that they do their own thing. Whether that is right or wrong, nobody knows, right? Because we haven't connected with them. And so when some of those things happen, when we realize that we're not always loving the people around us, when we're not always living out what we say we believe, that's like the light on the dashboard going red. And something has to change. Now, what has to change? Well, it says, we looked at, the love of God reaches its goal in doing his commands. So we need to receive the love of God. Later on in this same letter, John says, we love because he first loved us. So the first thing that has to happen is that we receive the love of God. And that's what Christmas is all about. Christmas is about being surprised by grace. Surprised by grace. That 2,000 years ago, God became a human being, and he walked into our world. And the reason he did that is not because people were starting to get better and they deserved it, not because we were such good people. In fact, he came into the world before we got better, before we deserved it. In fact, a lot of people who went to look for Jesus went to look for him to kill him. That's what Herod the Great did. Herod the Great heard that there was maybe a rival king being born, and he wanted to kill the newborn baby. That's the story of Christmas. And then as Jesus grew up, it didn't get much better. The people who memorized the scriptures and wrote the scriptures and copied the scriptures and taught the scriptures, the scribes and the teachers of the law, people like you and me who love the Bible, wanted to get rid of Jesus. And yet that didn't stop Jesus. He didn't wait for people to be deserving. He died because he loved the people who hated him. He died for you and me while we were still sinners. His love is a performance-free kind of love. It's a one-way kind of love. God is happy with you in Jesus Christ. You're okay with God. He has accepted you, and that's what Christmas is all about. And that radically changes how we live. The more we are surprised by God's grace, the more that's going to change how we live. Now, I don't